Afternoon. Welcome to the April 21st Special Governance and Priorities Committee meeting. I'd like to first recognize that we are on the traditional territory of the Snuneymuxw First Nations. Our clerk today is Ms. Sky Snellgrove, and today's Special Governance and Priorities Committee meeting will be held in the accordance with the Community Charter and Council Procedure Bylaw 2018, number 7272. The question period sign-up sheet is on the table by the double doors to my left for agenda items only. If during the meeting any member of the gallery has a question regarding an agenda item, please write down your name and the agenda item on the sheet. Members have been granted the authority to join meetings electronically, and today we have Councillor Armstrong, who is attending electronically. The first item on the agenda is the introduction of late items, and Ms. Snellgrove.
Thank you, Chair. For agenda item 4A, transportation update, we're adding a delegation from Horst Backey and Melanie Rolofson.
Thank you. So a motion for adoption of agenda is amended. So moved, Councillor Thorpe, seconded Councillor Turley. All those in favor, motion passes. So today we're here for a report on the transportation update, and we will let Mr. Sims, our General Manager of Engineering and Public Works, do the introductions.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Much appreciated, and thanks for the opportunity to be in front of the committee today on this, like a special meeting. So I appreciate the committee members making the time for this subject. So why are we here? Is really we sort of envisioned a two-step process around the pedestrian unallocated funding that Council has allocated as of last year, $1 million total to this particular project or cost center, if you want to call it that. Our thinking was that we would share staff's proposed approach and get the committee's feedback or change direction or whatever, and have some discussion. And as appropriate, you know, the intent would be to bring formal motions back to Council on May the 2nd. While we're also here, it's timely to update you on the status of the pedestrian unallocated projects of last year, which were started last year. And as you're aware and you'll hear that we're busy working away on them. There's a lot of good work currently underway. And we've heard, of course, some concern about time and why things take so long. And just wanted to clarify that this is really part of our normal process. Like we started in the spring of last year, and it does take this amount of time for planning, design, and then awarding of tenders. And as we've talked about yesterday, population growth, interest from the community and community expectations, and maybe a side effect of the pandemic seems to be a real increase in interest in traffic calming. So that we've sprinkled that in here as well, just to provide the committee with an update on some of the status of the projects, and maybe there's some room for discussion around traffic calming. The annual budget has remained unchanged, but the demand has skyrocketed. So we talked a little bit yesterday about at your Finance and Audit Committee meeting about inflationary pressures that we're seeing. And, you know, in addition to that, we've talked before about the transportation staff capacity, but really what we're seeing is Jamie referred to it as a very saturated market. You know, we're having trouble even finding engineering firms. Our normal, you know, if we can't do it within house, we'll find an engineering firm to do it. We're finding engineering firms now turning down work. And so that's, you know, a delaying, and then of course the contracting capacity. And I think it's just the result of so much spending going into the market. And that's also affecting some of the project delivery. And so that's the basic overview, and I'll leave it to Ms. Thomas to present. You've got the report, and it's fairly detailed, and we're, you know, again, the intent is to take the time to construct. Are we on the right track, or to consult and see where the committee wishes to go. Thanks, Madam Chair.
Thank you. And just before we start, I will recognize that Councillor Brown has also joined us electronically. So thank you. Ms. Thomas.
Thank you, committee, and thank you, Mr. Sims. So I will be speaking to the three items that Mr. Sims introduced. I'm going to start with what we've done with the $1 million from 2021 pedestrian unallocated funding. And council will be happy to know we have 44 projects underway. It's been quite a task to get them all done. It's a lot of projects, even though a number of them are small. We have completed 10, and they are shown, I'm sorry, sorry, I'm just scooching along right here. Can we go to the next slide, please? Next. Oh, that's me, sorry. Thank you. Thank you. The technology's changed. All right, there we go. So with 2021 funding, we identified 44 projects, and we've completed 10 to date, and actually that number today I learned is now 11. Tomorrow, another one will be done. And so there was 10 completed, or 11 actually, tomorrow. 5 are under construction, and 8 are scheduled for this summer. Okay, watch this. We're going to go to map 1. There we go. So the 11 projects that we've already completed, 4 of them are pedestrian flashers, and they have been installed at the Departure Bay Eco School, Labio and Shenton, Duffer and Crescent at Seafield Crescent, and East Wellington Road at Westwood Road. The other projects were the Guardian Wave installation, and that's an accessibility button that allows you to step up to a traffic signal and wave your hand at the button. The button is an infrared detector, and so it senses body heat and it puts in the call to the traffic signal controller to give you control of the signal to bring the pedestrian phase up. It can also be touched, so if that is what a person prefers, they can push the button, or they can just wave their hand. And actually, like any kind of warm object, like if you had a really big dog, that would also set off the button. But it's been really well received by our community of folks that have mobility challenges or would rather not touch buttons. And actually, Madam Chair, if you'd like, I'm happy to take questions through the presentation because it's a little bit easier to ask questions on topic rather than at the end.
Okay, at this time, I don't see any, but
Okay.
thank you.
Okay. So on to map 2. So these are the projects.
Oh, I just saw Councillor Bonner.
Okay.
I've seen these popping up on various intersections. I'm curious as to, have we considered using, instead of this type of technology, using a technology that just it knows that someone's there at the intersection as opposed to someone having to get out. Sometimes it's hard to get to where it is, especially if you're on a bike. And you have to get off your bike and walk over to it. So I'm wondering if there's how have we considered that, and is it a cost factor, why we're not using them? I know there's 2 different types. One was just sense people in the area. The other one is a walkthrough where you would walk up to it and it would sense you. They're called bullards, that sort of thing.
So thank you for that question. Through the chair to Councillor Bonner. Yes, we are looking at that kind of technology. That is a slightly different form of technology. It uses a camera, and the cameras are becoming very, very smart, and they do recognize the shapes of someone on a bike or a pedestrian. So we are looking at using that kind of technology when we change, when we upgrade signals more fully. So for instance, the Boxwood Connector project, we're looking at using those kinds of cameras to reduce the need for buttons.
So this is just replacing an existing system with a more up-to-date one?
Yes, correct. This is a retrofit, so that the cameras themselves for that kind of actuation are terrifically expensive. So this is a nice interim option until our signals are upgraded more fully.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Councillor.
Mayor Krog.
Thank you very much. Interesting point raised by Councillor Bonner, if I may ask. What's the relative cost of we'll call it the existing system, so to speak, the accessible system, which is the wave or the touch, and then a camera system?
Through the chair.
Not looking for exact figures, but just curious.
Okay, so through the chair to Mayor Krog, the buttons are about a couple of $1,000s each, so we would have maybe I want to say 8, 1, 2, 3, 4, 2, 4, 6, 8 buttons per intersection, and cameras are on the order of $40,000 per intersection.
Sorry, how much?
40,000
Total.
for the equipment. I'm going to just defer to Mr. Rose here because I don't want to dig a big hole.
Sorry, through the chair, I do want to just highlight that the camera technology does also enable us to eliminate the loop detectors that are in the road. And so I think at a typical intersection, it's just about a wash between the cameras and the loops, because the loops are roughly $1,000 to install right now. And with all of the redundant lanes, it adds up quickly. So there is a small premium to these accessible push buttons, but the cameras do provide a more fulsome data set.
And if I may, would I be incorrect in assuming that the camera technology probably requires the use of obscure minerals, et cetera, from around the world, or whatever metals that you know, I mean, these are the big questions, and I'm glad Councillor Bonner raised it. What is practical, what works, what's the cost, and what's the impact environmentally speaking?
Through the chair, I'm not really in a position to answer the environmental components of it, but the transition from buttons and loops to camera detection does create a longer life cycle, so that we could actually go through and repave an intersection without having to reinstall all the loops. The technology for the cameras for pedestrian detection and cyclist detection is still, it's evolving very quickly. I think that from a comfort level, we'd prefer to stick with these options for the short term, but in the long term, that there is definitely an option to go to that sort of detection.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And Councillor Bonner.
Thank you, Chair. And through you to the mayor.
It should be.
Thank you. Now I'm back on. I just, there's the question of accessibility here. And so anybody coming up to an intersection should be able to cross the street, whether they're sight impaired, hearing impaired, they're on a wheelchair, on a scooter, whatever, right? And I think the camera system in the long run, and it's not unlike the way we're doing our complete streets. If we completely rip up a road, it's going back in as a complete street. So I would imagine that if we completely rip up an intersection, it's going back in with cameras, which I think is the way to go, and I can quite see that. And these would be recyclable. You could take them off and put them in another intersection, I'm guessing, as well. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Over to you, sir.
No, Councillor Thorpe.
Yeah, thanks. Thank you. Madam Chair, I'll jump in if I'm on. Through you to Ms. Thomas and the other staff. So am I correct in assuming, I hope, that staff are not, to this point in the meeting, learning anything new, that staff, in fact, are already aware of the different technologies that are out there, and what you're bringing to us is your expert opinion on what would serve the city best, taking all factors into account?
I'll field this one. Mr. Rose?
Okay. Through the chair, in these circumstances, this is the recommended product that we know of that's out there. Not only does this provide greater accessibility by just having the proximity sensor, but it does actually also enable us to provide feedback to the users to address the hardware can project the cuckoo and chirp chirp for audio indicators. It can also provide auditory wayfinding, so it can say you are on this street at that street. And so for these specific locations, this is definitely the product that we feel is the most appropriate. And as I say, the video camera or the camera optical detection, we are using it on intersections for vehicle detection, but we are still wanting to gain a level of comfort with respect to pedestrian and cyclist interaction. And we do need to still, if we choose to move to cameras for pedestrian and cyclist detection, we still do need to find a way to provide that that non-visual cue to users as to when it is appropriate to cross the street. So.
Okay, thank you. And I appreciate Councillor Bonner's question because it adds to my information and my knowledge, which I did not have previously, but I'm glad to know that staff are already on top of what's trending out there and what options are available. Thank you.
Thank you. I see no further questions.
Thank you. Thanks. Thank you very much, Madam Chair. So map 2 shows projects that are currently underway, and we have tendered these projects and have awarded them. The construction contractor is in the process of scheduling them, getting them started. There is a Guardian Wave installation and tactile warning strip installation at Hammond Bay Road in Calinda planned, Hammond Bay Road at Turner, Comox at Prideaux, and Milton at Victoria. And the Halliburton sidewalk is partially constructed, so it's started and is about halfway done. Any questions? Okay, thank you. And so last but not least, these are the projects that are still coming on stream from last year. There are only 8 projects because we, as I mentioned earlier, the Wallace at Fitzwilliam Guardian Wave installation will be finished tomorrow. The Bruce and Albion Street raised crosswalk and pedestrian flashers, that is planned for installation in the June-July time period this summer. The Bruce and 6th Street pedestrian flashers will be installed, Hammond Bay Road at Tiki and Shores, Uplands Drive at Mexicana, Bay Street traffic calming, Departure Bay Road buffer bike lane needs some tweaking, speed reader boards at the Solaire School, and the Boxwood Road multi-use path from Dufferin to Tulsa. We still have 20 bus stop improvements to work on, and they're being scheduled and hopefully delivered by this fall. So that was what we did with 2021 budgeting. Are we good?
I don't see any questions except for I have one.
Okay.
Do we know everything going well? Will these be completed this year?
Hopefully. Our goal is, yes, to get things done this year.
The intent is,
Yes.
okay.
The contractor is staffing up and acquiring materials that's needed and scheduling it, so we believe so, but can I just ask Mr. Stewart can I get the nod from Mr. Stewart? He's nodding, so yes, that's the
Okay,
goal.
thank you.
Thank you.
I'm not
right.
seeing any other questions, so.
Okay. So the next part that I'd like to speak to is what we'd plan to do with the 2022 budgeting. There's $1 million allocated in the provisional funding, and we would like to know what the committee's thoughts are on what we're proposing before we bring a report to council on May 2nd. So this year, rather than doing many, many small projects, we thought we would do a fewer but bigger collection of projects with 4 streams. And so these are a little bit different than what we've proposed in the past. These will address pedestrian safety and comfort and mobility in an indirect fashion, some of them more directly, but also in an indirect fashion. Rather than doing many small projects at intersections, we're proposing a slightly different approach. So
I have Councillor Gesselbrock.
Just before getting this is a question for the previous 2021 budget. I'm just curious, the projects scheduled for construction in summer 2022, are they written down sort of in order of implementation?
through the chair to Councillor Gesselbrock, no, they are not in order of delivery. Mr. Stewart is here and he can probably speak to that. They are just in order of my brain. I put them on the page.
Great. I was just curious sort of where Bruce Avenue upgrades were in the queue.
Specifically Bruce at Albion?
Yeah, Bruce and Albion and Bruce and 6th.
That is planned for June, July of this year.
Great. Okay, thank you.
No further
Are we
questions.
good, Chair? Thank you. So one of the streams we'd like to fund this year and move forward with is intersection safety investigations. We know we have some higher crash locations within the city, And we're proposing a $75,000 allocation to use artificial intelligence to examine what is happening operationally at our high crash locations. This is a bit of a departure. In the past, typically traffic engineering uses collision analysis, but it is not as rich a data and it's delayed. We also are having difficulty getting collision data that's timely and current. So this artificial intelligence analysis uses cameras to watch intersections and using algorithms and software, proprietary software. The near misses are analyzed, and what is produced from that is a report with recommendations for engineering improvements. So this year, we would be looking at 3 to 6 intersections. We're not sure how far this funding will go or what's all required. We know we'll need specialized cameras for this. And then from that, we would have reports recommending changes, which we would then bring forward for the fall. Next phase is for implementing improvements. Good? Okay. Thank you. The second stream that we are proposing is a pilot speed reduction in 3 urban centers. So we have learned that the province is unlikely to be moving forward with their pilot speed reduction programs in municipal environments, and so we're proposing to do 3 urban centers with 30 or 40 km/h speed limits. Sorry. Clearly, I can't do 2 things at once. Thank you. Mr. Rose is going to manage my slides for me. Okay, so we're proposing $225,000 to be allocated to the pilot speed reduction. And we feel that this is a nice dovetail in with pedestrian safety, as well as what we're hearing through the city plan, Reimagine Nanaimo. It will encourage a modal shift to pedestrians and cyclist activity, and it meets with the Vision Zero goals for a community. So we're proposing that we would reduce speed limits in 3 cores: downtown, VIU, and NRGH. The funding would be, we're not sure how much funding would be required, but we think this would cover off everything that's needed to do this pilot project. And we have talked with ICBC and they will partner with us on it. We don't know what their contribution would be at this point. Part of this would be a detailed before and after study to see how effective the speed reduction would be in actually reducing speeds.
Oops, I don't know if I turned you off. Councillor Turley.
I'm assuming you're referring to my mic. Thank you. So my question is with regard to reducing posted speed limits in 3 specific areas. I'm assuming some conversation happened with the RCMP because they obviously will be either ticketing or trying to control awareness about the speed zones.
Through the chair to Councillor Turley, we will do that. That is absolutely critical. We have to be in partnership with all of our road safety partners around this, including education, enforcement, and the engineering. So yes, that hasn't been done yet, but pending council approval, we would proceed with that.
Thank you. No further questions.
Thank you, Chair.
I think maybe Councillor Armstrong.
Oh, Councillor Armstrong.
Yeah, thank you. Why were those 3 areas chosen? Because I've been looking at the pedestrian accidents on the ICBC stats, and there's been none in those areas at all, with the most of them occurring at Jordan Avenue and Maureen Way.
Through the chair to Councillor Armstrong. Well, Councillor Armstrong, we did look at the areas where we've received a lot of feedback from the public. That's part of it. These 3 areas have a nicely connected road network and pedestrian network, and so that's part of it. And the feedback from the public has been supportive of these 3 locations. I'm not sure if I'm answering your question.
Well, I guess my question is going to be, how are we going to be able to know if it's working or not when there's been no documented case of accidents? Already, I think half this area within the hospital area is already 30 kilometers actually, so it's already down to 30 kilometers. So how are we going to be able to look at that? I've been doing a lot more research on this, and I was looking at the UK, which has got the largest one, and it only reduced speeds by 2 kilometers, and they dropped their speeds considerably. And without enforcement, nothing's been happening. And the police, like here, they're down to 3 people on their enforcement team. So how are they going to be able to do all this? And how are we good? I'm very concerned about how we're going to track it for accuracy.
That is, through the chair, sorry to Councillor Armstrong. Those are very good points, and we are discussing all of those factors. I would say that one of the measures of the before and after effectiveness is the speed reduction. So the before data collection, we have to have markers that will then allow us to measure whether or not it's been effective in the after. I think that public feedback is going to be a big part of that, and RCMP callouts and complaints.
I guess my problem with the public feedback is many of the public don't know how to estimate speed. And when you actually go to those areas, you find that they've overestimated how fast people are traveling. So I really struggle with that because that's not very scientific.
Councillor, if you don't mind, I see Mr. Rose is wanting to say something.
Yes.
Thank you. So through the chair, I just wanted to elaborate a little bit on Ms. Thomas's clarification on how we selected these 3 areas to focus on first. And this was primarily driven by the outputs from our recently created pedestrian prioritization tool. So the majority of the locations that were identified as being a high priority were within these 3 urban centers. And so through the information gathered through Reimagine and through that process, we also felt that these were very walking friendly neighborhoods already. And so the combination of those 2 plus the relatively grid-like network felt like a very, or appeared to be a very opportunistic place to start. We have, through historical things, had mixed results with just utilizing signage and enforcement to moderate speeds. And so we are cautiously optimistic with this, but we have seen mild improvements. And so I think community feedback is definitely going to be something that weighs in on our determination on the success or failure of this project, but it will also be supported by on the ground data collection with traffic counters and speed monitoring. And so I think that this really should be viewed as the first step in an incremental process towards enhancing road safety. And we'll take the lessons learned from it to see where to go next and what we can do to further improve things. So I fully expect to see several steps in this process to get us forward to where we get to the point where the community is happy with what they're seeing.
Again, my concern still comes back to the hospital area where it's 30 kilometers for most of that area. So dropping it, well, we're not even going to be dropped. 40 is not going to make any difference when it's already 30. So, okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Armstrong. Councillor Bonner.
Thank you, Chair. I'm all in favor of dropping speeds as much as we can, and certainly in these residential areas, and people are walking around. Are we including Waddington, Townsite, I'm sure Boundary? These are more arterial roads, I would imagine. So are they part of that?
Through the chair. So we are looking at these as blanket areas, but there are going to be some roads within that fall within those footprints that we do need to be conscious of how they operate. Bowen Road falls within that corridor, Wakesaya, 5th Street, Bruce. And so there may be some that we have to make some decisions to exclude from it, but the vast majority will have some sort of a speed reduction on them.
And so, like, say if we're to take the hospital area, what is the outer boundaries of that we're looking at?
In general terms, it would align with the urban center mobility hub footprint, which is sort of a awkward shape, but it would capture all of that mixed use, high density land use.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you.
And seeing no further, I have a question. Oops. Councillor Thorpe
If I
first.
may, Madam Chair, thank you through you. Mr. Rose, you just mentioned in passing something about steps or increments. And I'm not opposed to this pilot reduction. I'd be curious down the road, no pun intended, to know exactly what the areas are that we're talking about when we say downtown, or the area that we mean by VIU and so on. But beyond that, the research that I have done on the Vision Zero concept, which I know you're well aware of, suggests that by itself, lowering speed limits does not reduce accidents. It's not effective unless there is also increased enforcement or other traffic calming measures involved. So I'm assuming that this would be a first step, and that as needed, other steps would be taken.
Through the chair, that's correct. So this conversation today is to gather feedback from council to ensure that our thought process and our aspirations to start this journey are on point, and then to share the understanding that we will have to come back and quite clearly outline where these zones will be set up and which streets will be included and excluded, and then move forward with this implementation and monitoring, and, as Ms. Thomas said, track the calls for service for the RCMP and our own issues, inputs, and come back with the combination of that anecdotal feedback plus the speed monitoring through data collection, and provide a follow-up report to indicate how successful or not the process was. And then at that point, we have the next conversation as to whether we continue to pursue this process of trying to moderate speeds and create a safer environment for vulnerable road users, or not, and if we choose to, then decide how aggressively we pursue that.
Good. Thank you very much.
And I see Councillor Brown now.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. Through you to staff, and building off of Councillor Thorpe's comments there, I'm just not clear from the report and the comments, is this funding just going towards essentially signage, or is it signage plus engineering and design changes?
Through the chair to Councillor Brown, yes. It will cover all of those things.
Okay, so there will be, bump outs or raised crosswalks or things like that.
I don't think we're contemplating traffic calming to that level at this point. We do know that with 3 urban centers, the number of speed limit signs that would be required is going to be substantial, and the before and after study is going to be expensive. So, and we don't know how much ICBC will contribute towards this quite yet. So we think 225 should be enough. I'm afraid to say anything because everything has been coming in so expensive lately.
Okay, so yeah, forgive me, Madam Chair, but just to follow up because I'm not clear. So I'm hearing yes to sign changes and engineering and design changes, but then I guess my clarity would be is what are the proposed, or what are the design changes to the streetscape that would complement and help reduce speeds to the desired posted limit?
Well, Councillor Brown, I think that any changes to the road would come after the pilot project of the speed limit changes. So if the speed limit changes in and of themselves were ineffective, we would look at how to further that effort through traffic calming.
Okay, so the funding here is essentially just for signs and studies.
And I'm going to look at Mr. Rose to make sure that he nods.
So through the chair, yes, at this point, we're expecting this to be signage and data collection, and as Ms. Thomas said, there's likely, ICBC is committed to providing some additional funding, but it's unlikely that there will be adequate to do any physical changes to the roads. So this is, I would not expect to see any design changes.
Okay, thank you. And Madam Chair, I don't know if you want comments now or later, but I will save mine for later.
Thank you. And it looked like Mr. Sims.
Madam Chair, thank you. Just a couple of comments maybe. One of them is that this is kind of moving us towards a bit of a cultural shift, right? And as far as having an entire neighborhood signed as a 30 kmh instead of just a school zone or certain spots. So we're learning as we go, and of course we'll be bringing RCMP and ICBC along, as Ms. Thomas mentioned and Councillor Armstrong pointed out. We need that enforcement piece. But the other piece in this is that this aligns with, you know, the ongoing work as part of City Plan. These three areas are our priority urban centers, and you know, the vision in City Plan is we're trying to get more and more of a walkable community, a tighter radius, and to do that, we're sort of introducing this gentle topic of let's reduce speeds. Will it be effective? We hope so, of course, but we will learn from this particular pilot, and at the same time, we're setting ourselves up for that sort of future vision of urban centers in these three locations.
Thank you, Mr. Sims. And I guess the question I had also was the $225,000, how would we be spending it? But I understand it's for signs and it's for the data collection and the planning before and after. I have to say, with $1 million to spend, you kind of want, I'm thinking you want something, no pun intended, more concrete. But anyways, moving on. Oh, Councillor Armstrong.
Yeah, I heard Mr. Sims say that you're dropping to 30 kilometers. I thought it was 40. Could I have clarification?
Go ahead.
Through the chair, it depends on which area we're talking about, Councillor Armstrong. For me, I'm thinking the downtown core will be 30 kmh.
Could I ask you guys to look at what happened in Edmonton and Calgary, and it came from their police and it came from their other people, and 30 kilometers was strongly opposed by the police as well as by the safety experts, and they looked at 40 because 30 gave people a lot of sense of a false sense of security, because nobody does that. And again, if you go look at the Edmonton study, the police came out very strongly opposed to 30 kilometers. So I think that's something we need to really look at. And I would also refer you to the UK studies now, which have shown that they've spent tens of millions of dollars and it's not been effective because it didn't change driving habits. So I think it's something we really need to look at seriously if we're going to do that, to look at the places that have implemented these changes and look at the results that they did and see where they failed and if we can address those situations. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Armstrong. I don't see any further questions.
Thank you. So I think we've covered that topic, Madam Chair. Mm-hmm. So I'm going to move on to the next one. Thank you. So the third stream that we're proposing this year is a partnership with the Ministry of Transportation on some improvements on the Trans-Canada Highway. We have had on the city plan for quite a while a sidewalk on this stretch of highway from 12th down to Cranberry. So that would be our component of this improvement. And the whole thing as a project would include improvements to the traffic signal timings, changes to the left turn slots on the highway, a sidewalk that would be our responsibility, a right turn deceleration lane onto Cranberry, which would be shaped such that it was a smart, what we call a smart right turn, so the drivers have to slow down or come to a stop before they make their right turn to help assist pedestrians with their crossings at that location. And so our portion is about $350,000, and the ministry is, their contribution is $200,000. And on the slide it says we would like to deliver by March 31st of 2023. That dovetails with the Ministry of Transportation's financial year. It's quite ambitious, and so I'm not sure we can achieve that, but that would be our goal.
Thank you. And not seeing any questions.
Okay. Councillor Armstrong has her hand up.
Oh, Councillor Armstrong.
Thank you. I just wanted to say I'm very much in supportive of this. When I looked at the pedestrian fatalities and serious injuries, 4 of them occurred at turning lanes. Mm-hmm. So I think this is something that's really good and really needed. So thank you for this.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And Councillor Tully.
Yes, Madam Chair, through you to Ms. Thomas. Just wanted to confirm this section of the Trans-Canada Highway on the page here. It says Cranberry to Mackay, but you mentioned 12th. I'm assuming it's just Mackay on one side and 12th on the other. Is that?
Through the chair to Councillor Turley. So 12th is that funny little road that's halfway between 10th and Cranberry. Our sidewalk is only proposed to go from 12th down to Cranberry. Now, conceptually, I want our consultant to also look into the possibility of extending it further north. I don't know if we have funding for that. Yes, I would like to do that. I haven't actually talked with Mr. Rose about it, but you know.
Sorry, I brought it up.
You know, I would like to see if it's possible because there are power lines and utilities and a whole bunch of challenges through there. If we could do it cost effectively, for sure. On the books, though, officially, it's just from 12th to Cranberry.
Thank you.
And Councillor Bonner.
Thank you, Chair, and through you to staff. Could you go over what a smart right turn is? I'm just not following it.
Through Chair to Councillor Bonner, I'd love to, and it's going to be a bit of hand waving. So free right turns, the high-speed right turns that the Ministry of Transportation has favored, and we have a lot of them in the city as well, allows a vehicle to pull very smoothly into the right turn and then proceed at speed onto the side street. A smart right turn, as it's called, brings a driver more directly to a, I wouldn't say a right angle, but it's more like a right angle so that the vehicle is pointed more directly at the side street and can't proceed at speed onto the side street.
So are we talking slip lanes here? Is that?
Well, it can be a slip lane, if you will. We would like to add a deceleration and storage lane as part of this project. It's actually in the shape of how the vehicle on the main line comes to make its right turn. So it's a little bit of a sweet spot between a 90-degree angle and the sweeping right turns that are currently in place. So it's a little bit less of a sweeping right turn. It forces the driver to slow down and control their speed.
Madam Chair, just an example of a recent installation of a smart right turn lane would be at Westwood and Jinglepot. So that the intersection upgrade that occurred there, it's just, you have to come to a stop, check, you know, that there's nobody crossing in front of you, and then you can proceed.
Thank you. Okay. And not seeing any further questions.
Okay. Thank you, Madam Chair. So that's the first three topics, and the fourth one is pedestrian amenities, which I would say is what we've traditionally brought forward to Council for their consideration. We'll be using our updated pedestrian prioritization tool and identifying, we're hoping 5 to 7 intersections and do bigger picture improvements. So large scale, $50,000 to $70,000 improvements at 5 to 7 locations, so that the math works out to be $350,000. And these would be everything all inclusive. So pedestrian letdowns, signal improvements, street lighting, what else have we got here? Flashing beacons if necessary, Twizy installations, the whole kit and caboodle, but in a compact location, like one intersection, or depending on funding, 5 to 7.
I don't see any question. Oh, Councillor Armstrong.
Thank you. Yeah, I do have a question on that. I went out with the Brecon Residents Association on 3 occasions to the road on Brecon, and I think is it Princess Royal or whatever that is, the cross. And that is an extremely dangerous area for kids. We've got the school there. There's no sidewalk. Is that going to be looked at and prioritized?
Through the chair to Councillor Armstrong, I apologize. You said Princess Royal, Councillor. Is that the one you meant?
It's the one, you know, that goes by the school there on Brecon. I can't think of the name. Estevan, sorry, Estevan.
I was going to say, are you speaking?
Yeah, it's the school. Yeah, Estevan.
So that area is of interest to us, and we are looking at it in terms of our pedestrian prioritization tool. The actual traffic signal itself is of the Ministry of Transportation and Infrastructure's responsibility. So anything we do there would be in partnership with them. We do know that the school, I want to say it's École Océane, is that correct?
Yeah.
Does need sidewalks, and I believe there's one being installed on the downhill side through development. What I would agree with you, we need pedestrian facilities through there. Mr. Rose has got his hand up here, so Councillor, so I'm going to pass the baton.
Through the chair, that will, among other locations with schools, will be areas that we're looking at, but that corridor is still in the process of having some surface works upgraded and completed. There's some relocations of the crosswalks adjacent to school and a couple of other things that are still sort of in the queue for delivery. Again, it's sort of that supply chain conundrum we're stuck in right now. So we can look at all of that in the citywide context, but we do need to be mindful of the things that are still underway. So,
thank you.
Mayor Crowe?
Thank you very much. And just to confirm, that is part of the BC French School Board. So most of the children who attend that school are in fact delivered by parents or bus, I take it as well. And do we know anything about the accident rate at that particular intersection? I mean, I know it's ugly, it's at the top of the hill, the ferry traffic's large, but is it a dangerous intersection? Do we know?
Through the chair to Mayor Crowe, we have looked at the crash rate through there, and it didn't jump out as being particularly dangerous in terms of crash rate.
That's what I thought. Thank you.
And with no further questions, I would like to ask, and I think we have the tools, or you have the tools. How are you going to identify the 5 to 7 pedestrian projects?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So we have been in the last 2 years working on a prioritization tool, and we're going to test drive that with this process. Mr. Rose maybe can speak. Do you want to add anything to that? No. So yeah, we'll look at pedestrian volumes, what needs doing, asset management. I don't know yet, but
okay.
It's percolating. We'll have something for you on May 2nd.
Does that come back before council?
Not in an intersection-based kind of way, as far as we know. We've been doing piecemeal things in the time that I've been here. Mr. Rose probably has more to add because he's got more experience. Yeah,
so through the chair, so these locations, like the purpose of this presentation was to gather feedback from council. And the expectation was that we would come back with explicit locations with our next report to actually identify where we're going to spend it. And so we will be using our new tool to identify that. We will, as we typically do, look for opportunities to add to existing projects to optimize funding. But it will be primarily driven by the new tool we've got. So.
Okay, thank you. And I see Councillor Brown.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Thanks so much for the presentation. In terms of feedback, highly supportive of trying to, the connection there on Cranberry and Mackey, and as Ms. Thomas commented, I appreciate the initiative to try to see if we can stretch that further. It is a highly problematic area for a variety of reasons, but pedestrians and cyclists. And the way the road's configured, it all produces not a good situation, especially with the speeds. I must say that I'm not supportive of actually the speed reduction with respect to signage for the reasons Councillor Thorpe raised. I think if this was more comprehensive look, or putting the signage in with some traffic calming measures and some potential redesigns, I would be supportive, but as it stands now, I would not be. And it also the AI bit, I don't think we need to do that, to be honest, perfectly honest. I think we got so many sections in town where we know that there is problems or there's perceptual problems, and the list of projects that we have is long, and even though it's a lower sum, I do note that based on 50 to 70,000, that is one project. So I think in my mind, it would be more important to spend the money on those projects. And I would hope the signage one doesn't proceed, because between the two, that's an additional $300,000, which when I voted in favor of the $1 million is what I had in mind. So I think that's what the community expects. That's definitely what I expected when voting on an increase to this budget. So I would be very supportive of the amount of projects, the real projects, and see them implemented on the city. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Brown. Councillor Thorpe.
Thank you, Madam Chair, through you. Just to this slide that's currently in front of us, identifying 5 to 7 pedestrian projects. I guess my request to staff through you, Chair, would be that when you come in front of council again with your recommended projects, that you come armed with evidence and justification for having those as your top priorities, because I never like to see pedestrian projects become a political football. And as I think is mentioned on your next slide, public requests exceed resources. And we often hear loudly from certain groups that are screaming that a certain project, in their opinion, should be top of the table. And maybe in the overall scheme of things, that's not necessarily the case. So again, just my request is please come with lots of background information to justify what you see as the top needs. I certainly am pleased that we're proceeding as vigorously as we can with pedestrian amenities. I think that's really important for us as the city grows. Thank you.
Thank you. And, oh, Councillor Brown took his hand down. So I don't see any further questions at this time.
Alrighty, on to traffic calming projects. So in the last couple of years, we have received many, many requests for traffic calming projects. We have 12 of them underway at the moment. Do you want to bring up map number 4? Thank you. So we have Lost Lake Road. We did a pilot project last year. We have Bay Street, Georgia Avenue, and Departure Bay Beach planned for this year. Oh, sorry. We'd like to do them, but 3 of them are not funded. Bay Street, the pilot project, was quite successful. It showed a 10 km/h reduction in 85th percentile speeds. Lost Lake Road, we had a sort of a smattering of success at one end and less success at the other end, but having said that, the speeds at the west end were about 54 km/h, 85th percentile. At the east end, it was 57 km/h, which is still above posted speed, but that is 9 kilometers less than what it was before we did the traffic calming. So the pilot project from our perspective on Lost Lake Road is complete. We would like to do more work out there. It was partially successful. To be completely successful, we'd like to add some more features. And Georgia Avenue Greenway, that pilot project is also complete. It didn't actually show a very good reduction in speeds, about a 5 km/h reduction in front of the school. However, that still was above the posted speed limit. And this Georgia Avenue Greenway is not funded. The Departure Bay Beach seasonal traffic calming, we've put that in for a few years now, and we see some decrease in speeds. It's marginal. And so we were planning on doing it again this year, but again, that project's not funded. We have 3 projects that we are in the process of doing conceptual design for, and that is Bradley Street, Extension Road, and Mountain Vista Drive. Doing the conceptual design this year would mean construction next, and next year the financial plan for traffic calming is $100,000. That's the ask. There are 5 projects in hand that we have data for. We see that speeding is an issue. We haven't wrapped our heads around what we want to do with them quite yet, and haven't started the internal consultation with our emergency services. And that's 7th Street, Howard Avenue, Ashley Road, Laguna Way, and Nanaimo Lakes Road. So open to feedback and comments and questions, Madam Chair.
No.
Councillor Martman, Councillor Armstrong has.
Oh, Councillor Armstrong.
Yeah, I have a question on Bradley Street. That's a street that's already 30 kilometers and has been for as long as I can remember. So what's the plan for there? Because we know speed bumps can't go in because that's a main ambulance road, and it's every speed bump can cause problems for an ambulance.
Through the chair to Councillor Armstrong, that is exactly the feedback we had, Councillor Armstrong, from our RCMP and the fire department. They don't want to see vertical deflections on Bradley. So we are wrapping our heads around whether options are available to us. It's already a very narrow road. There's parking on one side. So, you know, what kind of trade-offs do we have to make to achieve slower speeds through there? Having said that, the speeds are less than 50K, but they're nowhere near the 30K posted. And we've in the data, in the detailed analysis of the data, there's some outliers, like 3 p.m. in the afternoon, we have someone going through there at 110K. In my mind, that has to be a motorbike, because how else do you go that fast? So we do have these little outliers that are, I think, are a bugbear to the public, to the neighborhood. And so how do we address that while still giving good service to our emergency responders?
I think the question, when you say the 110, a lot of that reasons those people are going fast is they are going to hospital. So that's one of the questions. But I guess my other concern is, what's the problem that we're trying to fix? Like, when you look at the stats for pedestrian MVAs and injuries, none of these streets are even there. And we're not even addressing the ones that are consistently there. So that's always been my concern. So are we just arbitrarily picking these, or are we just doing this based on public feedback because they think there's a problem?
So we look at streets based on complaints. When we receive a complaint about speeding on a street, we do the data collection for traffic volumes and speeds. And our internal city guidelines around traffic calming guidelines give us a threshold of 57 kmh for the 85th percentile on a 50 kmh road. That is a threshold for where we would consider traffic calming. On top of that, we layer the functionality of the road, the classification of the road. So something like an arterial, like Bowen Road, for example, we would not consider traffic, I can't say we would never consider it, but it would be unlikely we would put traffic calming on Bowen Road. So we take all these different factors. The inception is a complaint from the public, though, and then we look at the data. Then after that, we approach them in a chronological order. The first one received is the first one we review. Have I answered your question, Councillor?
I guess for me, it's just, I'd like to see more scientific than based on what people say, because a lot of times, having worked here and gone to those areas, when you sit there and you do the radar and you capture it, the speed limits aren't what you're told they are. It's because, like I said, people don't know how to judge speed, and especially if you're coming around a corner, you always look like you're going 20 kilometers faster than you really are. And I guess the other concern I have is that I would like us to see, put our efforts into the areas where we have accidents every year. Like where we can see that we've had pedestrian accidents, like one is Oliver Road and Uplands Drive. Every year there's pedestrians hit there. Comox, another one. So I guess that's from Bruce and 7th. That, like, Bruce comes in a lot. So I would like to know why we're not focusing on the ones that have the highest incidence of pedestrians injuries and even fatalities. Because I think that's what we should be trying to prevent, is injury accidents to pedestrians and cyclists. And none of these streets even hit the map when you look at the ICBC map for any of that stuff. So that's just my comments. Thank you.
And I think Mr. Sims wishes to respond.
Thanks, Madam Chair. And to address some of Councillor Armstrong's comments, I think, which align very nicely with the programs that we have in place. So the general pedestrian unallocated is one avenue for council to, allocate funds towards projects, but there are other pockets of money, that intersection upgrades and so on and so forth, that we choose from. And those are prioritized with the pedestrian tool, the prioritization tool that we presented to you a couple of times. You remember there was a consultant, perhaps, I'm sorry, I haven't got a good sense of time, several months ago, about how we use GPS data and so on and so forth to walk us through some of the data that Councillor Thorpe was looking towards. This particular program is traffic calming. It's a line item that stands alone, and it was created really to respond to those public demands for there's somebody speeding on my street. That doesn't necessarily mean, as Ms. Thomas pointed out, that doesn't necessarily mean that we rush out to put speed bumps on a street. We'd go and see if there's truth to the perception. As Councillor Armstrong's rightly pointed out, it's hard to judge. We've noticed during the pandemic, more people working from home, fewer cars on the road. We see a higher concentration of complaints of speed, as an example. We go out and do the data collection, traffic counts and speed counts and so on and so forth to see if the street meets those minimum thresholds for a traffic calming project. If it does, then we start to look at what are the prescriptions that we might apply. But this line item is about $100,000 a year. And so as we've seen, the sort of demand from the community increase over the last, not very many years, 3 or 4 years, for more traffic calming, we're seeing this kind of longer list grow and grow. So
Just as a follow-up to that, because I look at the pilot project on Lost Lake Road, which I really appreciate, because when you do go up there, that's probably one of the most vulnerable streets for pedestrians and cyclists because it is extremely narrow, it's windy, and there are no sidewalks. So if we really do put pedestrians and cyclists at risk there, versus when you go to Dover Bay Road, there's sidewalks on both sides. So to me, it's not as, and I guess it's just my opinion, not as dangerous for cyclists and pedestrians because the road's wide, so vehicles aren't going to swerve in, because I think sometimes with narrow roads, and I'm just doing research on it, so I can't say if it's accurate or not, it's just my personal opinion. A lot of times versus hitting a vehicle or a pedestrian, you're going to go for the pedestrian because it's your automatic survival thing. So that's why I'm always concerned about the narrow roads without sidewalks. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Bonner.
Thank you, Chair. When you were talking to the RCMP and ambulance about Bradley Street, what was their opinion on offset tables?
Through the chair to Councillor Bonner, Bradley Street is an important connection to the hospital area, so vertical deflection was not desirable. So speed humps and speed tables, that kind of thing was not desirable by the emergency services.
Even offset ones where they can go around them?
Right, and we have been talking about that, whether we can use ones where, Mr. Rose has a fancy terminology for it, but it's basically, there's a space in the middle so that the emergency service providers can span it with their wheels. One of the challenges, though, is North American trucks have the same wheelbase as our emergency service responders, so someone in a large truck can also do that, straddle the opening. So that's why we haven't proceeded with something like that.
I would think that typically large trucks have logos on them, so it's easy to figure out who they are. So people can complain directly, which I do on a regular basis. But again, my question back is there's a number of ways to do raised traffic calming, and one of them is offset tables. I mean, there may be the technical term for it. I'm just curious, is that an option there, and has it been looked at?
It's definitely under consideration.
And I guess another question, if I may, back to Departure Bay Beach. Do we know actually how to slow traffic down? Like, because Departure Bay Beach is an interesting one because we've been doing this for years. We try this year, and then we try this year, and then we try this year, and it doesn't seem to work. So, like, can we actually slow traffic down? Like, there must be a way to physically, if you do this, and this, traffic goes slower. So I'm not being an engineer. I'm relying on you. Like, how do we do that?
Mr. Rose.
Through the chair. If we want to stop cars, we can stop cars. Yeah. The conundrum or the challenge with Departure Bay Road is it is a seasonal pattern that changes in the winter. And I need to qualify this by saying that the improvements that have been made down to the beach area are actually making it more of an all-season destination. But for the most part, the summer months is when you see the highest pedestrian demand between the fields and the playgrounds on the upland side versus the water side. And so that coupled with really the community perception of the major road status, you know, it's akin to Bowen Road. You know, it's 10 to 12,000 vehicles a day, I think, off the top of my head. And so if we introduced vertical traffic calming there, we haven't done it to date because we've been cautious and been sensitive to what the community's feedback would be. And so we have made these incremental steps to try and find the least intrusive ways to achieve the desired outcome. And we've seen slight nudges towards where we want to get to, but we haven't really gotten to the point where we would sort of flag it as, yes, we've hit success here. Now, success also has to be tempered with what the community views as success, because this is who we are trying to provide the benefit to. And so, you know, if there was a desire to hit the mark of 40, 50, 30K, whatever we decide on, we can pretty confidently do that, but it may have some undesired consequences. So, hope that answers your question.
Well, it does. It raises sort of a little other question is if I could see that, right, then I guess that would be, to Councillor Thorpe, at that point, it would be a political decision to say, yes, we're going to do this and damn the torpedoes sort of thing, and achieve what we want for that area. Not suggesting that we're doing it now. I just want to know, like, if we can slow traffic, can we? And if we can, what would it look like? And what would be the sort of unintended consequences of it, doing that sort of thing? So to be able to then make that decision, are we going to do it or not?
So if I can sort of circle back on sort of this whole conversation about speed management across the city. Over the last few years, fundamentally through the pandemic, we have seen a steady increase in requests from the public for investigations into traffic calming. There are some that we look at and go, nope, the speeds are completely in line with what we would see. Put that to the side. There are a number of them. In fact, I think there's even more than what's on this list at this point, where we've actually gone out, collected the data, and said, like, there's speeds that are well above what we would expect to see on these roads. Are they generating collisions? Not yet. But we also know that the higher the rate of speed when an MVA occurs, the lower the survivability for everybody. Mm-hmm. And so we also know that different neighborhoods, different communities, different cities across the province, across the country, across the world have different responses to interventions, whether it's signage, whether it's moderate physical changes, or whether it takes extreme. I think it was with this council where we had the ongoing challenge with Jackson Road. And that took some very extreme measures to manage the issues that were going on out there. And so I think that unequivocally anything we propose has to be backed by data and has to be justified by scientific evidence. I think that there are circumstances where that scientific evidence and our proposed prescriptions, as Mr. Sims described, may not actually be what the community wants at the end. And so this is why we do these incremental steps to try this and to try the next thing and the next thing before we invest large sums of money in blanketing a neighborhood with speed humps. You know, touching back on the discussion around $225,000 to pilot a speed limit reduction in our urban centers, that is a proposal or a thought that could reflect positively on a broad area, whereas having to do physical changes at one location, you get a handful of locations as opposed to those larger areas. So again, this is why we brought this idea forward for discussion and guidance from council. So hopefully that's helped to.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Thank you.
If I may, Madam Chair, I'd like to add to Mr. Rose's comments. I think we do see, as we move forward, our Complete Streets guidelines will address some of those things you're talking about, Councillor Bonner, because the Complete Street Guidelines have a different design for local roads, which discourages speeding. And so as we grow and evolve as a community and these developments happen and these new road design standards are adopted and constructed, we're going to see a change in speeds because the road will be self-explaining. But until that point in time, we have to use other measures to retroactively control what people are doing.
Okay, and I have Councillor Gesselbrock and then Mayor Crow. Oops.
A couple questions. Just one, I keep hearing Councillor Armstrong refer to the ICBC collision map. Is that something that we do use in our decision making for prioritizing areas? Like it's a part of the matrix?
Through the chair to Councillor Gesselbrock. Yes, in fact, we do use ICBC collision data. It is less reliable these days, and it's at least 1 year, if not 2 years behind, so it's not very current for us. It also sometimes it's in an incomplete data set, which is part of why we were proposing using the AI technology. So yes, we do use collision data. The highest locations that come out of that kind of data are typically intersections because of the conflicts at intersections. That's where more crashes happen. So that's why intersections come to the surface when we're looking at collision data as opposed to long stretches of roadway off-road collisions. Mr. Rose has his finger up.
So I just wanted to also highlight that, so the pedestrian prioritization tool we've developed directly draws from the ICBC data set, but the ICBC data set is actually just raw absolute numbers. It has no correlation to traffic volumes. So, you know, I think both of us have done a number of collision analysis where you see these very, very high number of collisions, but then when you look to it and realize that there's also thousands, if not millions and millions of vehicles going on through the intersection. So relatively speaking, it's a very low rate, even though it has a high value. And so there's a few intersections we've been investigated around the town where that's the circumstance, or the inverse is also quite probable. There's an intersection I reviewed about 20 years ago that had a very low number, but it turned out that just about every single person who tried to make one specific movement had some sort of a collision.
Okay, great. The second question, it sounds like there is a growing and a large demand for traffic calming, and there's a pretty limited amount of budget and resourcing to really deal with the degree of demand. Is that correct?
Through the chair, I would say at this point the demand exceeds the capacity. Yep.
Okay. And I'm just curious, is that something that department, like, is it something that, you know, we could look at, you know, in terms of a resourcing question? I mean, it might probably not going to be for this budget, but is it something that we can increase our capacity if it is something that is indeed a priority?
Through the chair, I would say that yes, this is definitely something that can be a discussion through the budgeting process. I think it is also important to gain even more awareness of what the community supports with respect to traffic calming and the degree to which they would like us to proceed forward. There's definitely some areas where neighborhoods feel very strongly about more action. There are some where less is preferred. So I think it, you know, I feel like I've said this several times today, but it's an incremental process. We take a bite and make sure that it still fits and feels right. We take another bite until we get to that point where we've got some overall success.
Right, and just follow up on that, like in terms of taking a bite and following up, like, is that sort of strategy employed because we've been burned in the past by kind of overdoing it and then having to undo a lot of infrastructure or you know, a degree of pushback against something where you know, the political pressure is untenable? Is that, I'm just kind of curious, just sort of informing that approach of sort of incremental.
There are two factors that come to my mind. One is, as Mr. Sims pointed out, this is developing a cultural shift, and trying to discourage the high speeds and the hurry up and rush, and where I'm going to is the highest and most important thing in the world, and sort of losing respect for other people who are in the public space. And it's also a good practice to take smaller steps, and assure and sort of take incremental steps forward until you get to that point, and not overreaching too much. So I'm not sure if it's entirely lessons learned or if it's just a good practice to take moderation.
Great. Yeah, I think my comment on that, sometimes I think like, I've seen in other aspects as well, we can be overly cautious. And I, as a staff person, I think, and as a politician, I can see rationale to that. But at other times, I think like maybe, we can push it a little bit more, just given the demand, and there may not be the consequences that we've intending, unless we've got a lot of data showing to the otherwise of that. And then just specifically, say for example, with the money that's been allocated for the traffic calming in the 3 urban centers areas, just with the signs and the study on that. If we didn't pursue that, would we be able to allocate those funds to doing the potentially funding those traffic calming projects that we don't have current funding, that have been an ongoing thing? Is that sufficient money to maybe deal with Bay Street or Lost Lake Road or Georgia Avenue, and these areas that are kind of been ongoing requests that there's a desire for more?
So just to be clear, this discussion presentation isn't going to be formally allocating funding in any direction. This is this is informing the next report, which will allocate those funds. And so if council chooses to take that funding, and instead of covering the larger area with a signing program or a change in regulation program, we focus on 2 or 3 of these other locations, it would definitely take a chunk out of them. I don't know if it would cover all of them. I also would caution that the delivery is still going to be prolonged. These aren't designing and implementing physical traffic calming is clearly a long timeline from decision to on the ground. And so so it could be reassigned, but the delivery of the product would likely not be for upwards of 18 months. So.
Okay, great. I think that's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Mayor Crow.
Thank you very much. As we're engaged in this discussion down to some of the minutiae, I'm reminded of Churchill's line about 3 kinds of lies: lies, damned lies, and statistics. And I'll use Bay Street as an example. Having experienced the traffic calming, I would suggest that the figures you've got are exactly right. But my son-in-law, as my daughter and son-in-law were living in between the houses they owned on a side street off Bay Street, said, "Oh yeah, it was great, Dad," except that everybody started coming along our street and getting back up onto Departure Bay Road to head up Departure Bay Road, which is where they were planning to go anyway. So I'm not criticizing the choice because there's a park there and a playground. On the issue of Departure Bay Road, there's an old friend of mine, I describe him as a friend, more an acquaintance I suppose, has been a frequent correspondent on this, saying we've got to do something about the dangerous situation down at the bay. And my observation, and God knows I'll be punished by this with some horrific accident, but congested traffic is slow traffic. In the summertime, when it is busy and the playground is full and the parents are there carrying their kids' sand buckets back and forth across the street, the traffic is dead slow. I pass that way at least twice a day, 5 days a week, and more often, etc. And in the winter or in the springtime or late fall, when there's not as many people in the parks, the traffic does tend to speed up. But I can't see any observable difference, nor do I think the statistics, in fact, bear out that it's a dangerous area in terms of accidents. And if I'm wrong, tell me so. So I'm saying it somewhat in response to Councillor Bonner. If we really want to slow down traffic, the one thing I think we do is we densify and we fill the streets with vehicles and pedestrians, because people inevitably slow down. But on some of the major thoroughfares, we're not going to do it. In Departure Bay, we're stuck with the street network we have, which is old and predates amalgamation, and literally some of them we know were designed more as cow paths than they were as car paths. And so I'm trusting staff on what they're doing, where they're doing. Sometimes it has to be a neighborhood response. People need to feel secure. But on others, I think, as I say, I'm not aware of a lot of deaths on Commercial Street because traffic goes slow, because you can't get up to much of a speed and or it's congested. So I think those are some of the ultimate solutions, but I think the complete streets that Ms. Thomas mentioned, Metro Drive, I know it's a concern for some of our councillors in terms of being dangerous now. It's too narrow and tough for trucks, but having, as I've said before, I drive it for pleasure, just to go along that wonderful street. And it's slower, and it's safer, and there's good views, and you can see people who might be placing themselves in danger, and you can slow down accordingly if you're speeding. So, so far from what I've seen today, I'm generally supportive of what you're doing. I am, however, with Councillor Thorpe and Councillor Brown to some extent around the issue of signage. I don't know how much impact that will have. And again, I'm not convinced that speed in and of itself, or lowering speeds, has that kind of impact. It will reduce the severity, but there's lots of good ideas that are always seem to be wonderful. I remember when the Barrett government brought in vehicle inspections, we all thought it was fabulous. It was going to reduce traffic accidents. It was going to, reduce pollution. Cars would be safer. There'd be less deaths, et cetera, et cetera. And the subsequent NDP government, of which I was a part, abolished it after a thorough study showed it didn't make a damn bit of difference in terms of improving traffic safety, deaths, injuries, etc. But everyone still thought it was a good idea. Apart from the annoyance of it, it looked and seemed logical. People would have their vehicles checked, their brakes would be checked, their cars would be safer, et cetera, et cetera. But at the end of the day, it didn't do anything. It may have made you feel better, but it didn't do anything. And I'm afraid that may be part of what we're trying to do here in terms of, and I'll use this as a general comment, it may make us think it's better and feel better, but it won't have a measurable impact on what we're all looking for, which are safer streets for pedestrians, those of all abilities, cyclists and motor vehicles. Anyways, I won't bother waste any more time given the late hour, and I know there's a delegation wants to speak as well. So thank you, Chair, for indulging me.
Thank you. Before we move to delegation, we have Councillor Armstrong.
I just wanted to ask a question about when we're looking at the speed humps and stuff, because they significantly increase carbon emissions. Like they say that you use fuel consumption goes up 47% on roads with 30-kilometer speed limits, and the carbon emissions really go up because people slow accelerate. Are we taking that into consideration based on like our donut model as well?
Through the chair, that's not a clear component of our decision-making process. Really, the use of traffic calming, whether it's vertical or horizontal, is really to reduce speeds and improve safety. So it's something that we can be mindful of. I'd be curious to investigate the comparison between horizontal and vertical deflections a little bit further to see if there's a correlation, but I think that I suspect that anytime there's an introduction of a speed reduction, you're going to see that reciprocal return to a speed outside of the traffic calm zone. So I'm not sure if that, I think they're competing or contradictory benchmarks. So
Okay.
there may need to be some guidance to staff on how we should relate those two.
I'm bringing that up because Mexico City is removing so many of theirs to improve their air quality because it has such an impact on their air quality to stop and go. So I just was wondering if that was something we were looking at. Thank you.
And I don't see any further questions. I believe that is the end of the presentation, so we will be having the delegation. I just wanted to put in my 2 cents, and this might open up a conversation for later. But when we passed the budget for $1 million, I really thought it was going towards pedestrian safety, sidewalks, traffic, the intersections, et cetera, for pedestrian safety. And so I'm not leaning towards signage and studies and even the AI intelligence, even though it sounds great. I was really wanting to put $1 million, boom, into actual projects. So that's just my 2 cents. But I think we will welcome the delegates to speak. Thank you for your presentation. And for the delegates, oops, I lost my agenda. It's a late item. Thank you. It's here. And we have, and forgive my pronunciation, we have Horst Back and Melanie Rolofson.
Yes.
And thank you. You'll have 5 minutes, and I will let you know at 1 minute.
Thanks. I don't think it'll take that long.
Thank you.
So Melanie and I are here on behalf of the Lost Lake Neighborhood Association and in relation to the traffic calming initiative that was undertaking the pilot. So the 3 areas, communication, evaluation results, and then the project completion are the 3 areas we want to briefly talk about. So there's been no update on the Lost Lake Neighborhood traffic calming page since early last year. We have been encouraged, all community members were encouraged to provide feedback to a dedicated email. Community involvement typically would involve two-way communication. It would be really nice to see an update on what actually transpired, what the results were as well. So around the results, the 5 lines that you were provided with, I think are obviously not the complete report. I don't know where that complete report is. It would be really helpful, I think, for the community to see the results. Like, what were the initial measures? What were the results? What were they actually trying to get at? Like, what were the objectives? There was a comment made in the report, the 5-line report to you, about the level of community acceptance. And it isn't really clear to me how that was measured as well. And it would be helpful also to see any other results, both positive and negative, that the calming initiative has created. So we're really hoping to see an interim evaluation as well, possibly on this website.
Thank you.
To Melanie.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for having us here today. We appreciate all the information that everybody's provided. We're wanting, obviously, to work with the city on these projects, but we feel we're a good example within the city for when a neighborhood is wanting to have traffic calming. So when our traffic calming project went forward, we were very excited, the neighborhood was very excited, and portions of it have been completed. So we're a little bit confused, as in our third point here of the project completion. We see here this afternoon that it's considered active, but we've also heard that it's completed. But it isn't completed because we're missing key portions in 2 specific areas that, yes, potentially the pieces that were used were maybe not appropriate for whatever reasons. They weren't accepted very well. They didn't work because of snow clearing equipment, so on and so forth. but nothing has been determined as to what to do about it. Will they be replaced? We've been told there's no more funding. So as much as we appreciate that the city needs lots of different projects throughout the city, if we're left with an incomplete project, is it complete or is it not complete? And will there be funding becoming available to make it complete so we can have actually a clear vision of the completed project and that we can have somewhat of a safe street, or more so than what it currently is? Because as Councilperson Armstrong has stated, and that we're all aware of, it is very narrow, very winding, no sidewalks, so on and so forth. So we have multiple different problems occurring all at once. And as much as we appreciate that we were considered for the project and that it was to be examined and so on and so forth, we're just left unsure of where we're going.
And thank you. And Councillor Gesselbrock.
Thanks. Thanks for coming and speak, and we're at the Governance and Priorities Committee, so we can have a bit of discussion on this, but it's appropriate to ask staff for questions.
I think we'll have questions for the delegations, and then we can ask that.
Okay.
Thank you. And I see Councillor Brown.
Yeah, thanks so much, Madam Chair, and through you to the delegation. It was my understanding that the neighborhood associations had sort of appointed a working group to sort of, or a couple point people to sort of handle communications with the city and the neighbors. And I was just curious, has communication occurred between the city and the point person with the neighborhood association?
Is that for myself to answer?
Yes.
We have had some meetings with the city, yes, and we've actually had 2 different meetings following the partial completion that we consider. And so we're basically here today to just continue to put forward the fact that it's, in our view, not a completed project. And if there is lack of funding to complete the project, where do we go from here? And if the new budget is accounting for, as has been discussed this afternoon, signage and different key projects, we appreciate the fact that those also need to be done too, but where are we left in an incomplete state? And how can we gather the information to be notified of what will become of this?
Thank you. Councillor Brown, anything further? Nope.
Nope. If I could also respond to the question.
Yes.
So we were directed for the evaluation to what you saw in the Governance and Priorities Committee agenda, which is 5 lines, 5 sentences. That's the evaluation. I don't think so. And I was hoping to see more concrete plans, which we also, I was expecting to see them as well, and I didn't see them. So we have no idea where this is going. Just that there'll be more, but we don't know what. So yeah, it's a problem.
Okay. Councillor Armstrong.
Thank you, and thank you to the delegation. My question is, what area do you see as the biggest concern for you still? Because we hear that, we see that the project is not, you're not satisfied with it. What areas do you feel really need to be worked on?
So the level of frustration, I think, is pretty high right across. But the area that has had the majority of the traffic reduction is 650 meters of a 3.2 kilometer stretch. That 650 meters has 3 structures that have slowed the traffic down. The remaining part of the 3.2 kilometers has effectively 5 structures. So yeah, the rest. The rest needs some work.
So are you thinking that, I'm trying to get a feeling from what you think needs to happen there. I travel that road frequently just to see what's going on. And, we put that little roundabout in, which really, I think really does slow people because it really is effective. Are you looking for more things like that, or what are you looking for?
I'm not a traffic engineer. We've had a number of items that were there initially to slow traffic that were removed on Vandernook and near the intersection of Vandernook and Lost Lake Road. Tanya Drive, there were some installations there and they disappeared very, very early on. There are large stretches right now without any traffic calming at all. So yes, people do slow down and then they speed up. So if you have enough structures, one presumably would not be able to get to the speeds that we currently have.
Thank you. I'll have more questions for staff after in response to that.
Thank you. And seeing no further questions for the delegation, I'll just ask you to have a seat and then we may have questions for staff. I've got Councillor Gesselbach.
Chair, just following up, it sounds like just the community is looking for communications on what was the outcome of the pilot project and sort of where the project stands now, and is there plans or is there a need for additional interventions and what they could look like? And then I guess, you know, it looks like there's a resourcing issue which was stated in the report, but I'm curious sort of what are the next steps in terms of communications and what we foresee for this particular project.
Through the chair. So I think just with respect to the communication, I think as was sort of acknowledged, there have been discussions with between the sort of appointed representatives from the neighborhood association and Ms. Thomas discussing the how things have been recaptured and how that information, what that information looks like. Maybe it was not conveyed in a deliberate diagram with we counted here, 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 and here, but I think the information was attempted to be shared. I think that the notion of complete is maybe not the correct word. I think that our first attempt has been put in play. We've tried it. We've had some success at the easterly end where we've got some speed humps and the traffic circle. Further to the west, we tried to introduce some more economical interim measures that were less effective and did need to be removed. Some were damaged, some needed to be removed as a result of snow and ice control. And so I think this is sort of that discussion of we've tried once, we saw some wins, we saw some losses, now we need to come back and try again. And this is then the conversation of where do we apply our resources. Right now we have very scarce resources in sort of the traffic calming pot of money. So if there's guidance from council to find a way to move funds or transfer funds from something into that to address some of these outstanding or in-stream projects that haven't achieved success. I'm not going to use the term completion because we don't know where that is until the community lets us know that we've hit that mark. So I think this is just, again, one of those steps along the journey. So.
Great, thank you. So just following up on that, I guess when we do a pilot like this, in terms of the process of updating back to council, I guess it sounds like we're kind of midstream, and we completed the pilot. There's been some discussion with the community, and this is sort of the moment that we're receiving the feedback of the outcome of the pilot. Is this a point that requires council to, direct like, hey, we need to take another crack at this, or would staff be coming back with a report on the outcomes of the pilot and provide options of what we need to be doing for next steps?
So I would see this transportation update as the opportunity for us to share the State of the Union. We think these are some ideas. These are still some emerging challenges that we're facing. Does council agree with them? Should we be directed to focus on something else? So this is where some feedback would be very much appreciated. And so then we can come back with a report suggesting, well, we should do this and we should invest money here, and this is where we should apply our resources. So, do we continue to pursue traffic calming on Lost Lake Road, knowing that we've had some success, or do we try and allocate some resources to an area where we haven't been able to introduce anything yet? And so that becomes a bit of a discussion that we'd like some feedback on.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, and I guess just sort of my take in terms of the priorities of where to allocate the funding. I don't foresee any more increases occurring in this budget cycle. So I think that it probably, hearing from other councillors, the speed limit reduction sort of in those core urban settings may not be something that we're interested in pursuing, and that may free up some funding. That this could be one of those areas that would be good to have another kick at the can and see if we can sort something out. So that would be my take at the moment. Thank you.
Thank you. And just so everybody knows, I've got Mayor Krogh, then I've got Councillor Bonner, Councillor Armstrong, Councillor Brown. You're on.
Thank you, Chair, and through you to staff, and maybe I'm missing something here. I don't think I am. This is part 3 of the status of traffic calming projects. References 12 projects. I appreciate that Lost Lake Road is included in the active, and that's because the problem hasn't been solved. And I note that it says very clearly Lost Lake Road, the pilot project is complete, and that's all I don't minimize this when I say this critically, that's what we've done to date. We've had a pilot project. The results have not been as successful as one would hope, but that is why it's still shown as active, because it's not been finished, and we're not finished, and what it may cost to fix it is probably a pretty significant number, I'm guessing, because if you were putting sidewalks along that road, et cetera, we're talking major expropriation and major expenditure. So am I wrong in my interpretation of how I'm reading this report? I'm always happy to be told I'm wrong. I don't get offended easy. I've been this long in politics and not got offended a few times.
Mr. Rose.
Your Worship, you've summarized it well. So,
thank you.
And Councillor Bonner.
Thank you, Chair. I would like to see coming back to us a report that you said, if you do the following things, traffic will be at this level in speed. I know you guys do it, you just told me, and I also remember Mr. Sims sitting over in that chair telling us due to global supply chains that we're not going to be able to do as many projects, and some resources may be freed up in his department. Not yet, right? But the possibility of that coming up forward. And at that point, we can decide, okay, this is too much money, we're not going to be able to do it, or it's not. And then at that point, we can say it's completed. I'm just not a keen fan of keeping to try to do something year after year after year, and I just not think. If it's not going to happen, it's not going to happen, and let's just move on to something else. While we're on this subject, and we haven't had time to talk about it, is I'm not in favor of the AI thing, right? And reason being is we have a lot of great engineers in our department who I think can solve this problem without it. But I'm looking at, I don't know which traffic intersections you're talking about, but I do know that collisions between pedestrians and cars generally happen with both pedestrians and cars are moving. So to me, the simple solution to that is to allow pedestrians to move when the cars aren't moving, and allow the cars to move when the pedestrians aren't moving. So that would require making a small change, which I think would be a small change to how the traffic lights work, so that pedestrians only move at this time. We saw one down in Victoria, worked quite well to me. Pedestrians moved, and then the traffic moved. You look at Bowen and Northfield, which I know is getting redone, right? And you can walk there anytime, and people are dodging cars. And there's tons of car parts all over the place. It's a bad intersection. It's going to be redone, but Dufferin and Bowen isn't, because it's already done. And Labio and Bowen isn't, because it's already done. So to me, the simplest solution would be to just change the lighting system so that pedestrians walk and then cars move. And the other thing is, I don't think putting up speed limit signs to reduce traffic is going to work in the areas that you've said, only because we've done it on Departure Bay and it didn't work there. So I would sort of like to see it down in the downtown area, because there's a lot of sidewalks and stuff like down there that makes it maybe a bit more interesting. But I'm just not sure it's going to work in the other areas. So we could certainly free up money there. And finally, to the mayor's point, sidewalks don't slow traffic down. They just kind of create a sort of a buffer so that when the car is driving faster, it can drive faster because it assumes that the pedestrians is safe. And you can have safe roads without sidewalks on them. And I think Lost Lake would probably, or Long Lake, or whatever the name of the street is, would probably be an ideal idea for that, is let's just slow the traffic down so that cars and people can coexist in the same area. Because we're never going to get sidewalks in there, not for $1 billion. So I think we have to look at other options. Thinking out of the box, go for it, that sort of thing. That's my 2 cents.
Thank you, Councillor Bonner. Councillor Armstrong.
Thank you, through you to staff. Going back to the Lost Lake situation here, can you comment on why some of the measures didn't work, and is there other measures that could be taken, or will that be coming to us later? Because I don't like when we start pilot projects and then don't finish them. Like, I know the pilot project is finished, but we haven't heard back what the issues were and are they fixable? Or as Councillor Bonner said, they might not be fixable and we just going to have to say, you know what, we can't do it. We don't have the dollars.
Thank you, Councillor Armstrong. Mr. Rose.
Through the chair, I think I'd like to go back and take a fairly thorough look, or maybe get Ms. Thomas to take me through it. But my strong intuition is that and I think the delegation even highlighted this, the easterly section, roughly 650 meters, had fairly dense introduction or application of traffic calming features, whereas the remaining section was not as liberal. And so I think that if we were to apply the same density of treatments across the corridor, we would see the same benefits. So I would say that the first starting point is to determine the community's degree of satisfaction with that one section, and then blanket that back. One of the challenges when we did the first iteration was cost. That one section was the lion's share of the budget, and so if you just extrapolate out, it tallies up quite quickly, and so it's a 3+ kilometer long corridor with very little natural speed attenuation, and so it is natural for people to cruise through there, and without any defined area for pedestrians or cyclists, it's not a comfortable place. But I think that if you look at the corridor as a whole, the most economical way to create a more comfortable place for all users is to reduce speeds. So
I guess, but the problem is we know that doesn't work. It hasn't worked. People have been trying to do it for years. We're not changing drivers' habits unless basically through enforcement, signage. I mean, we saw through the Georgia Avenue example that people aren't slowing down. They don't slow down on an average. Even when they do slow down, they're slowing down 4 kilometers. So it's not a huge reduction. So I guess that's my question. It's like, how do you get them to slow down? I mean, speed bumps, you'll slow down until you hit the bump, then you're over it, you speed up right again, then you slow down, you speed up again, you slow down. That's human nature. So I guess my question is what mechanism can we use to do it? I mean, we try public education campaigns, they don't seem to be working. I think in this day and age, everybody's in just such a big hurry, but how do we get the message across to slow them down? Is there better messaging that we should be doing? Like whether it's videos with little kids talking about, this is my life or whatever. I don't know. And I guess that's my question. Like we start a project, then we determine, oh, there's something wrong with it. And then we move on to the next one. So I would like us to actually finish a project. And like I said, if it comes back that, there's just nothing we can do, we need to hear that. Or council, you're going to have to invest $3 million. And then that's a council decision to make. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Brown.
Yeah, thank you. Through to staff and just sort of in response to the delegation. I don't think this is anybody's first stop coming to council and appearing as a delegation. I remember the last time folks from the Lost Lake Neighborhood Association appeared here too. They were essentially just appealing for a better connection with staff. And I think we could talk about it amongst council all day, and it doesn't really add much value to staff's ability to do their work. And so I'm just curious, how are we going to loop back with the association and maybe respond to some of their concerns of wanting information and being part of that conversation?
I will look to Mr. Rose.
Thank you very much. And through the chair, so I'd like to encourage the continued discussions between the representatives and Ms. Thomas. They have not on a regular basis, but they have been occurring. And I think that it's important to acknowledge that these conversations are taking place while efforts are being explored to try and find ways to continue to move the project forward. And so, do we need to redirect some resources to try and keep the website more up to date? I'm not sure if there's new information we would have been introducing, but that's something we can enhance. But I think at the end of the day, where we really want to be looking towards putting our resources is trying to find a solution to the problem.
And Councillor Thorpe.
Thank you, Chair. If I may, yes, just to follow up on Councillor Brown's comments, which I agree with, and it seems to me that the delegation, as much as anything else today, was looking for improved communication, which is often the base of problems. But my question through you to staff is there an established group or individuals that you are communicating with rather than individuals that might approach staff? So are you dealing with the Lost Lake Neighborhood Association? Maybe I should have asked the delegation this, but who is speaking for the community when you put forward proposals or information to them? Can you answer me that?
Through the chair, the communications have been between the delegation and Ms. Thomas to discuss the outcomes of the previous work and exploring solutions to move forward.
Which I understand. I guess what I'm suggesting is that there is some onus or responsibility on the neighborhood association to have a definite channel of communication established, so that you're not dealing with one-offs and individual residents who might not share a common vision of what is needed and what they think about it. And I don't know the answer to that either, but I would encourage the neighborhood association to maybe take steps to more formalize their communication channel.
I think Ms. Thomas has something to respond.
If I may, Madam Chair. So we established an email network that we were providing updates through. The people that were interested in the Lost Lake Road traffic calming signed up for a regular email. What happened was, with workloads and priorities and so on, and the winter removal of the soft features for the snow and ice control, we haven't done an update through the email channel, and we haven't updated the website. That can happen now that we've spoken with council and the GPC today to help us decide where we're going with this project. I think what our takeaway today is that council would like to see more focus on traffic calming. So we do have the information in hand about the the before and after study that can be put on the website. And honestly, as of January, we're fully staffed, so we have a little bit more capacity for doing that kind of thing, like updating websites and sending out regular emails. So definitely that is possible, and we're able to do that now.
Thank you. And I don't see any further speakers. I know there wasn't a motion here, but I'm hearing Mr. Sims.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Much appreciated. And I'll take some of the heat for the transportation staff being under tremendous strain. You know, as you know, the corporate priority's really been around Reimagine Nanaimo, and that's been the focus of these two and their staff. And that, you know, I think holistically that's a good thing. But I maybe just wanted to summarize what I've sort of telegraphed from council today, and certainly enthusiasm around the Trans-Canada Highway between Mackay and Cranberry. Some support definitely for the pedestrian amenities, some of the 5 to 7 intersections. Didn't hear anyone feeling warm and fuzzy, excuse me, around the interstate, excuse me, the safety investigations on intersections, or the pilot speed reduction in, other than Councillor Bonner, woohoo about that. But so perhaps we've got those two items that are very well supported. And that's really the purpose of today's discussion, was to get council's feedback on where do we go. So generally, can I suggest that the intersection safety investigations and the pilot speed reduction, which total about 300,000, could be allocated somewhere between some improved pedestrian amenities and some traffic calming. But just,
I would say you've summed it up well, but I think council should speak. So.
Of course, yeah.
And I've got Councillor Gesselbrock first.
Thanks. Just on the intersection safety investigation with the cameras, I'm just curious, sort of, would this be something new that we would bring in this technology to utilize, or do we hire? Is there a group that has this equipment that would set it up on areas that we see potential issues? I'm just curious a bit more background on that.
Sure, through the chair. So the hardware would be under our control, and the purchase of the cameras and the installation of the cameras would be under our control because that's locally based. The information, the videos that are collected are then sent through a Canada-based server to a software smart company that does the analysis and produces the report. The hardware can be moved, so we can relocate it to other locations, to other intersections, or even stretches of roadway if that was what we chose. The locations that we were proposing, or would have proposed, were the high crash locations. We looked at 89 intersections in the city and picked the top 6 that were under the city's control, not the ministry's control. And so I think I answered your question. There would be software that is proprietary. We would buy a license or use on an as and when basis, and the hardware would be ours.
Yeah. Okay, understood. And just 2 questions. This is something that we've never done before. That's one question. The other question is where it has been employed in other municipalities. Has there been sort of exceptional results from utilizing this and having outcomes that just you wouldn't be able to get to sort of with a few brains sitting around looking at something that sort of more in-depth analysis is required?
So we haven't used it before, but it has been used in other places, and I'm not sure I would say it was revolutionary. I mean, I don't know if traffic engineering ever is. It's the kind of information that you would only get if you sat there and you watched the intersection for many hours, for many days. And it's the near miss that's analyzed. So that sometimes is a thing that happens and we don't even see it with our own eye, but a computer can analyze that. And that's the richness of the data, is that it's what we wouldn't see necessarily observing. You have to be looking in the right place at the right time, whereas the cameras are focused on the entire intersection, and it can capture all the near misses.
Right. Yeah, just speaking to this specifically, I know there's some other councillors that have been lukewarm about the idea. I think we are facing an issue where there's just sort of a prioritization of resources, and we want to make sure the stuff that we can do right away, we can do that with what we have, and maybe that's a reason why not to go that route. But I personally think that this use of technology is something I think that probably could enhance our ability and amount of time that it would take people to sort out the type of fixes that could occur when you can have this AI technology being able to deal with it, and especially if there's been good results from other communities on this, is something that I think that if not this budget round, that we should keep definitely in the back of our plans to employ. So I'm supportive of it, and might not fit in with this round, but I don't want to have the idea completely disregarded. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm not seeing any further questions. And with no motions, okay. I guess I thank you very much for your presentation. Thank everybody for its time. And I think as a delegate, you're allowed to write it on a piece of paper, or I can just invite you up. Come on up.
Sorry, thank you. I appreciate that. Just to address Councilman Thorpe's comments, Horst and myself are actually from the Neighborhood Association, so we are representing the neighborhood in general and going based on comments from the neighborhood which we're bringing forth, and we have been the persons staying in contact with Mrs. Thompson and having the meetings and the discussions back and forth. So I just wanted to clarify that. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So motion to adjourn, Mayor Krog, seconded Councillor Bonner. All those in favor? Meeting is adjourned. Thank you very much, everybody.